Okay, friends, here we go. Let's pick up where we left off last time. We were talking about resources that we can use to manage stress and manage difficult events, right? Um, we talked about some internal sort of personal characteristics last time, and now we're going to talk about some external ones that have been studied in terms of what they can do for us in order to help us handle bad stuff when it comes our way. There has been a ton of research done on the idea of social support as being uh, a mitigating factor on stress and on the negative impact that stress can have on health and mental health as well. Now, it's good for us as humans to have other people taking care of us. We've mentioned that a couple of times throughout the semester, but let's try and break that down into what that really means. Why does it matter that we have other humans around? Well, it really breaks down into three different categories of assistance that social support can give us. Um, Sometimes the support that you receive is actual tangible assistance. One of my favorite stories to tell as far as this goes is I remember living in California. I was working on my undergraduate degree. I was out there with my family. We were poor as church mice, and we blew a tire on our car, on our family car. My brother and his family had come over for Sunday dinner. We were having dinner together, and he noticed that the tire had gone bad, right? That it was flat. Asked me about it. I'm like, oh, it popped as I was driving home, and I just, there's nothing I can do about it. I can't pay for it, so I guess I'm just going to have to ride my bike or something or take the bus. And he said, okay, that's too bad. And we finished our dinner, and they drove home. And then 10 minutes later, they came back. We happened to be out front, and he came back and just sort of came and gave me a hug and slipped $300 into my hand and said, listen, I have been there. Um, I know what it's like. Go fix your car. It's fine. Don't even worry about it. That's tangible assistance, right? That's somebody giving us the physical resources that we needed that we did not have, and that made all of the difference, because without that, I don't know how I would have reasonably gotten to my classes at school so that I could finish my degree, so that I can be here talking with you right now. Uh, uh, yeah, that brother of mine just passed away from cancer a couple of months ago, so that's takes on some additional meaning for me now. But anyway, okay, so other resources that people can give us is information, right? Sometimes what you need is not necessarily money or food, but knowledge, right? The knowledge for how to do a thing, or what direction to go in. Um, when you sit down with one of your professors and you're like, I don't know what to do. I'm here at college, and I'm not sure I'm here because I'm supposed to be, but I don't know where I'm going. And they say, okay, let's talk about your options. And they actually give you some information about, what can this degree do for you and all of that. That's informational assistance. And then, of course, there is emotional support, which is not to be undervalued as being any less than the other two. But I think we all get a feeling for what that's like, where we feel overwhelmed, we can't deal with things, but really we can deal with things, we just emotionally feel like we can't. So you just need somebody to hold your hand or give you a hug and say, it'll be all right, you can do this, I'm here with you, and get you through the hard times, whether it's a breakup or you're failing a class or whatever the case may be, right? Um, Really, when it comes down to why we need other people, it's those three things that really encapsulate all of it. And we as humans are designed for this. Even the most antisocial amongst us still want other people around, need other people around. We may not necessarily want them in our space all of the time. I personally love to have my family in the next room over a lot of the time. It's where they are right now. but I don't want to be in the house by myself. I need to know that I've got other people who have got my back, who will watch out for me, that I can watch out for. We're built that way as humans. Okay, other external factors that provide support and positive outcomes for both physical and mental health, interestingly, is religious observance. Now, this is an interesting one, and I actually did my PhD on this topic, my PhD, my dissertation study, um, where I was looking at what are the factors within religious observance that seem to make the difference, because there is a lot of research over the last 20 to 25 years that shows that people who are religiously observant live longer, spend less time in the hospital, take fewer sick days, and generally are a little bit happier than those who are not religiously observant. Now, for those of you for whom religious observance is not a thing, you're like, that's dumb, that's not a thing. Well, it is, actually. I'm sensitive to that point of view. Uh, and I'd like to try to describe, I think, why perhaps you get some of these effects within religious observancy, and how maybe you can reproduce them for yourself even if you're not religiously observant, right? Now, nearly all major religious codes out there have some sort of health commandments, right? Health dictates that things that you are supposed to eat, not supposed to eat. You're supposed to use this hand for eating and not the other one. That really, when it boils down to it, comes down to hygiene and health, right? So obviously here in Utah, with the predominance of the LDS Church, um, there are plenty of folks super familiar with the idea of health codes. But the LDS Church is not unique in that regard. Pretty much every single major religion out there has some sort of health code to keep people healthy and well. So the more observant you are, the more likely you are to follow those rules and therefore be a little bit healthier. Um, Religious observance is also linked to having a larger social sphere, a larger sphere for social support. So it's not just your mom and your sister and your dad who can drive you to the hospital if you're sick, or that will bring you a casserole if you can't get out of bed, or whatever the case may be, but you'll have all of those folks that you are interacting with on a weekly or maybe even daily basis because of your religious observance. And once again, nearly every single religion out there has dictates to take care of other believers. And maybe not just other believers, but your neighbors as well, right? And so that is going to increase the number of people who are looking out for you, who can take care of you if something goes wrong, right? And then there is also, this one has a little bit weaker research support simply because it's harder to study, but increasingly we feel like this is something that has something to do with it as well. The idea that life has meaning and that there is something that you are working toward, whether it is a reward in the next life or that the difficult things that you're going through are meant to make you humble or make you stronger or teach you to care for other people more. Providing that overarching sense of this is why the world is the way it is seems to reduce levels of internal stress and despair, and seems to help people cope better when bad things happen to them within that religious context. Now, as I talk about those factors, none of those are necessarily have to be linked to any given religion, right? So if you want to try and reproduce that for yourself, if you want to start a community group that goes to people's houses and checks on them, you can certainly do that. If you want to figure out what, in sort of minute, specific terms, what the world means to you and why we do what we do and why bad things happen, that doesn't have to be linked to any religious understanding. It just is for most people. So you can maybe go about gaining some of these benefits for yourself, even if you're not somebody who feels like that's something that's important in your life in terms of religious observance. But if we're talking about how this works for most people, most of the time, religious observance does help people live longer and be healthier. And so it's worth studying. Okay, let's go back to some of our internal characteristics that we mentioned last time, but maybe didn't really delve into, in terms of how they help us deal with stressors and how they help us to be more resilient. Resiliency is a big word that gets used repeatedly throughout your chapter. That just means the ability to bounce back when negative things happen so that you can handle them constructively and you don't get overwhelmed and you are able to maintain your health and well-being. Okay, so here are some personality characteristics that seem to have positive relationships with resiliency. Conscientiousness. Those who score high on conscientiousness, unsurprisingly, tend to be more on top of the things that go on around them, right? So somebody who is conscientious is somebody who gets their homework done on time. Somebody who is conscientious is somebody who is likely to have dinner around the same time every day and not miss their workouts just because they're tired, because they are conscientious. They care about keeping things orderly and doing things the way that they feel like are important, rather than just letting it be whatever, because that is what being high in conscientiousness is, right? Somebody like me who's a little bit lower in conscientiousness, I'll get it done when I get it done, and I'll roll out of bed when I wake up, and breakfast will sort itself out eventually, and what's working out, right? So you can see how when bad things start to happen, somebody who is used to taking more control of their day-to-day existence, um, is going to have a better chance of managing anything negative that comes their way, right? So we're here at home and the water main breaks. Well, in my house, that would be a severe catastrophe. I'm not sure if we've got the money to deal with that right now. But someone who has all of their other stuff already sort of on a schedule and managed, and they know what's coming next, even if they don't have a plan for what to do in that specific emergency, will likely to have an easier time coming up with a plan and putting that situation in order than someone who isn't used to putting their life in order because they're not as conscientious, right? So this helps people handle stressful events more easily. Related to this, although not exactly the same thing, is an internal locus of control. Locus just means location, right? Where do we believe control resides in our lives? If you have an internal locus of control, you feel like you are in charge of your life and the outcomes in your life. If you have an external locus of control, you feel like it's the world that goes on around you that ends up determining your outcomes, and you probably don't have much to do with it. Now, you can certainly find objective truths to suggest that either one of those is what's really going on. And it almost doesn't matter. If you have the sense that you have control over your own life, you will try to exert more control over your own life, and just the exertion of that control will give you the sense that you're trying to handle things and things are getting under control even if they're not under control yet. And so you'll experience less stress than somebody who's just like, I can't do anything. I just have to wait for things to get better and I have no control over my life. That's somebody who is going to experience much higher levels of stress when something bad happens, right? Self-efficacy. Excuse me. This is the idea that you are able to do the things that you want to do. If I have a sense of self-efficacy, I know what I'm good at, I know what I'm capable of, and I know what it's going to take for me to accomplish the tasks that I want to accomplish because I've done them before, right? By contrast, someone who is low in a sense of self-efficacy is not confident that they can get tasks done, uh, is likely to be more easily stymied in their efforts to complete a task and not get it done, right? And when you are trying to put your life back in order when something bad has happened, if you don't have a sense that you are going to be able to complete the tasks to bring things under control, then you are going to have a much higher uh, level of stress, and you're going to spend more time with things not under control because you're not working on it, right? And then last but not least is just the internal sense of optimism. People vary naturally on this. Some people are very optimistic and just think things will work out. And others are naturally quite pessimistic and they're like, yeah, they work out for other people, thanks very much. Not so much for me. Folks who are optimistic tend to have lower levels of stress, suffer less from mental health disorders, and have more resiliency. They bounce back more quickly and more easily when bad things happen to them. Now, these internal things can feel a little unfair, right? I didn't make myself a pessimist. I just am, right? And so if my life has taught me that I have no personal control over things, what am I supposed to do about that? Well, it turns out that at least some of these things are things that you can mentally practice. There are exercises and sort of mental exercises that you can go through to try to train a sense of optimism, a sense of personal control over the world around you, and self-efficacy and conscientiousness as well. It's a question of how you choose to look at things. We may have our predisposed way of looking at things already, and those can be really hard to go against. But you can absolutely train yourself if you care to take the time and effort to do that, uh, to change the way that you think. People are capable of changing the way that they think. So if you're a real negative Nelly, like I tend to be sometimes, it can be as simple as training yourself at the beginning of the day to say, look yourself in the mirror and say, good things are going to happen for me today. And then at the end of the day, to take stock and say, what are the good things that happened today? If you look, you'll find them, right? Even on the worst of days, still you can find good things that happened. And it's just a question of perspective, how you choose to look at it. What are you focusing on? Are you focusing on the positive? Or are you focusing on the negative? Now, just because you're focused on the positive doesn't make the bad stuff go away. And if you're dealing with heavy stuff, it's still going to be heavy. But that sort of retraining of focus can help people learn to be a little bit more resilient and be a little less crushed when, there's a natural disaster and their family is displaced, or they lose a loved one, or they go through a divorce, or whatever the case may be, right? All right, let's talk a little bit about general adaptation syndrome. This is, I'm going to mispronounce the researcher's names. Hansel? I don't know. Look that up. He described, back in the 60s, I want to say, maybe early 70s, in his research into stressors and how people respond to them, what he called the general adaptation syndrome, which is a reliable series of responses that people move through as they confront stressful situations. When something bad happens, what happens first is a shock, right? This is the alarm stage, where you become aware of a problem. A tiger walks into the room, and your body goes, whoa, we got to deal with this. And so you ramp up, and you can see this purple line is intended to be the task performance or level of response that people give throughout these three stages. Now, in the alarm stage, with the initial shock, you have an initial drop in response, in performance, where you go, whoa, what am I going to do about this? And then immediately, in a very short period of time, we push back. right? Whether that is my body initiating the fight or flight response so I can run away from the tiger in the room or fight it, or whether it is me um, getting mad in response to my wife yelling at me, where first I was like, whoa, what are you talking about? And then I'm like, no, hang on, you can't treat me like that, right? So that's the alarm stage. You get this dip in response and then a quick upturn in performance and level of stress response as you are pushing back against whatever that stressor is. Now, if that stressor continues, if you're not able to immediately resolve it, then we move into what we call the resistance phase, where the stress response and level of performance remains high as we struggle against whatever it is. I am going to fail this class if I don't finish this paper by midnight. All right, we're just buckling down, and I'm not leaving this room until it's done, right? And it's stressful, and I hate doing this paper, and blah 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 blah. But whatever, it's gonna happen, right? Now, if the resistance phase goes on long enough without a resolution to the stressor, then you begin to move into the exhaustion phase, where the body can no longer keep up the level of energy that it is exerting to resolve the stressor, and so performance starts to degrade, and eventually you exhaust your resources and quit or fail or whatever the case may be. Now you'll notice there isn't, there aren't time markers here on our x-axis, and that's because how long this takes depends on the strength of the stressor. We do have two different types of stress responses in the body, which I believe I've mentioned before. We'll talk about here on these next slides, but just to put them out there for you, we've got the fight or flight response, where our body is flooded with epinephrine and norepinephrine to give an immediate, very strong response to an immediately threatening stressor. This fight or flight response is why you've got stories of moms who are able to lift cars off of their babies, because it allows your body to respond very strongly for a very short period of time in order to resolve the stressor. However, a lot of the stressors that we face in modern life are not tigers or cars on top of our babies, but rather finals week, or a bad relationship, or a landlord that's just a real crapper, or whatever the case may be, a job that we hate, where they are not as immediate of stressors. We're not going to die if we don't deal with this stressor, but they also don't go away. They just keep at us and wear us down over time. Now, our body is built to respond to these kinds of stressors as well, but we have a different stressor response. It's not appropriate to flood our bodies with epinephrine and norepinephrine when it comes time for finals week, because all that will do is make us hyper and have a hard time focusing for several minutes, and then we'll be exhausted, and then we're not going to study. Our body has a different hormonal response for lower level stressors that last longer. This is the cortisol response, mediated by the HPA axis, which I'll talk about here in just a second. Cortisol is a stress response hormone that can last longer in the body and provides a longer, lower slope of increased response so that we can stick with something for longer, right? So I have so much studying to do before finals. It's insane. What am I going to do? All right, let's buckle down and do this, right? And so for a week, you just kill it, right? You just don't emerge from your books, and you're getting the papers done, and you're taking the tests, and you're killing it, and you get done, and you're just like, whoa. And then you're sick for 3 days afterwards, right? Because your body has expended so much energy with that week-long sort of release of cortisol that has kept you chugging along, that then you have to recover from it. Now, that could be considered the exhaustion phase that I'm talking about, where you're done with finals and you're just like, I'm not moving, and Netflix is the only person I'm talking to for the next 3 days. but it can also happen over longer term. One of the examples that's frequently given of the exhaustion phase is someone who is a caregiver for someone suffering from cancer, right? That's a years long ordeal, most likely. And again, the fight or flight response isn't going to be useful because you have to ramp up your response and work more and be kinder and pick up the slack for a much longer period of time. But there has been quite a bit of research on folks who are long-term caregivers for those who are terminally ill, that eventually they reach the exhaustion phase where they become depressed themselves, um, and run out of steam and are no longer able to provide the care that is needed to be given. Doesn't happen to everybody, but again, it depends on your stress response and how resilient you are, how long you can stick with this. Okay, so how does the cortisol response work? Where does it come from? This is sort of an ambiguous picture. That's supposed to be the middle of your brain. Uh, this is showing the hypothalamus, excuse me, which is right down at the bottom of the page here, that sort of dangly bit underneath the brain. The hypothalamus is the part of the brain that is sort of the thermostat. We've talked about it before. It regulates a lot of the processes of the body to keep us in balance. When a stressor arrives in the environment and is assessed as a threat, the hypothalamus triggers or sends a signal to the pituitary gland, which also exists right nearby in the bottom of the brain. The pituitary gland, which is frequently called the master gland of the body, then sends corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH, to the adrenal glands, which are little sorting hat looking things that sit on top of your kidneys, that then release cortisol into the bloodstream. So that's how cortisol gets into the bloodstream. Cortisol is a good thing, right? It helps us handle stress. However, in the long run, if people have chronically high levels of cortisol, it does break down the body and brain in a way that is bad for us, right? So long-term high levels of cortisol leads to the breakdown of neurons in the brain, and poorer response in a lot of our internal organs. So it's bad for us when we have chronically high levels of stress over months and years. It breaks down our health both physically and mentally. This is the study of psychoneuroimmunology, right, which tries to look at the interplay between our central nervous system, our brain, and what it is doing in terms of sending hormones out into the bloodstream, and then the interaction of our immune system as well, which is what helps keep us healthy, helps fight off bacteria and viruses that will make us sick, right? Our immune response is blunted when we have chronically high levels of cortisol. And that's one of the reasons why people under high levels of stress tend to have poorer health and poorer mental health as well. A couple of other things that have been studied in terms of their effect on the interplay between health um, and personality. There was a really famous study that was done on personality type. Actually, one of my teachers in grad school at Duke was one of the primary researchers on this, where they studied type A versus type B individuals, and then followed them for decades, checked up on them, and gave them health exams and whatever. Now, you've probably heard those terms before, but if you haven't, type A individuals are proactive, aggressive, short-tempered go-getters, right? Type B personalities tend to be more laid back, more congenial, less likely to need to have things their own way, right? What they found over the course of a couple of decades was that people with type A personalities were much, much more likely to develop heart disease than type B personalities. And as they looked further, it wasn't even just type A personalities, because there's different type A personalities, right? You got that person who's super focused and hardworking and a go-getter, and then you've got the other person who is combative and like has to have things their own way and just a jerk, right? Both of those sort of fall under type A, but you might almost call them subtypes. It was the people who were super combative and aggressive and had to have things their own way that had much higher levels of heart disease in the long run. These people, unsurprisingly, had much higher levels of circulating cortisol in their system chronically than did type B individuals. There's also been some research that shows that chronically high levels of stress is related to the incidence of cancer, because one of the things that our immune system does is it keeps our body from making errors, which is what cancer is, right? A cell grows out of control. A series of cells do. And our immune system is responsible for keeping a lot of that from harming us, right? If your immune system isn't up to the job because of high levels of cortisol in the long run, then you're going to end up with higher levels of cancer as well. Okay, talking about it cognitively, how are we approaching stressors mentally? There's some work that shows that how we appraise stressors matters, right? How we look at the situation determines our response and also determines our level of stress. We have two different kinds of appraisals. There's the primary appraisal, is this a threat or not? And the secondary appraisal, what can I do about it? How am I going to solve this, right? And folks who are more likely to see stressors as challenges rather than problems tend to have lower levels of stress, and once again tend to confront them more proactively, more effectively, and as a result experience less stress. There's also the difference that has been studied between emotion-focused coping and problem-focused coping, right? You probably know that person who, when something bad happens, they just go to bits, right? They just fall to pieces and say, well, this is just the end of everything, and how am I ever going to recover? The end. Unsurprisingly, those folks have a harder time coping with stressors than to individuals who, again, you probably know a few of these folks who are like, okay, this is something new. Let's tackle this. All right, gird up my loins, right? That is problem-focused coping rather than emotion-focused coping. Now, it's easy to think of problem-focused coping as good coping and emotion-focused coping as bad coping. However, there are situations and stressors for which an emotion-focused response is appropriate, right? If your romantic partner comes to you and says, I feel like you're not paying any attention to me and I'm upset, you being super like problem-focused and being like, okay, let's make a plan and I'm going to deal with this and done. All right, I am taking care of you. May be less effective than just saying, let's talk about this. I'm so sorry. I'm listening. Tell me how you feel. Let's cry a little bit, right? Maybe that's what you need to do. So it just depends on what the stressor is. But generally speaking, if it's something that can be solved, right, like major stressors tend to be, then problem-focused coping tends to be the better way to go about it. Okay, hardiness, optimism we've already talked about. Hardiness is just another word for resiliency. And like I said, this is stuff that you can learn, right? You're not just stuck being out of control forever. There are stress management programs that help you learn how to confront things more effectively. For you, yourself, right now, as a student in SLCC's Psych 1010 class, as it comes to its end, what can you do to improve your own level of physical and mental health? I know there are lots of us who struggle with our own mental health diagnoses, who struggle with poor health. Heck, I couldn't walk for most of last year. I was walking with a cane for about 6 months because, well, it doesn't matter. Anyways, I feel you is what I'm saying. Things are bad for a lot of folks. what can you do? Well, safely and responsibly increasing your level of physical activity, as much as that's sort of the go-to answer for everything, and you get tired of hearing it. It does make a difference. Like if you're somebody who doesn't move much at all, spends most days indoors, and spends a lot of your time either in the chair or in bed or on the couch, a 15-minute walk, right? That's where I had to start once my back started getting better. Just, walking around the driveway for just a couple of minutes. It's all I could handle. Um, it cleared up my mind amazingly and helped me feel quite a bit better. I had some really dark days when I couldn't move. Um, and almost regardless of what your stressors are or what your mental health status is at the moment, responsibly increasing your level of physical activity, even just a little bit. You don't have to like join a gym or buy a bike or anything like that. Just literally go outside and walk down the street and back. It helps. It really does. It won't solve all your problems, but it is one thing that you can take control of. And as we've talked about, having that sense of control really does some good downstream things for you in terms of how you face your other stressors. Eating right. I've talked a lot about my love for Taco Bell and how much trouble that causes me. Um, when I eat home cooked food that is specifically prepared for my health, I do better. I feel better. I sleep more deeply. Um, and sure, sweet potatoes and chicken get a little old sometimes, but there's lots of options out there. And it doesn't mean you can't still have your Taco Bell occasionally. I still do. But when it starts to get to be, 4 and 5 times a week, I start to feel really bad again. Not to mention the questions of weight gain or anything like that. It's just a question of my body's not designed for that kind of crap. And so when I reduce it, I feel better. Quitting smoking, it's a hard thing to do for those who already have the habit, but um, at any level, you can be a lifelong smoker, and if you stop smoking, there are physical benefits that start showing up within just a few weeks in terms of increased lung capacity and increased health and increased lifespan. It really does make a difference in a very short period of time. Engaging in safe sex. It can be the last thing on your mind when that's what's going on. But learning to make those habits of either making sure you've got protection or making sure your partner has protection, or having those conversations before you're about to hop in the sack. Um, Learning those patterns will save you grief, not just in terms of unwanted pregnancies and morning after pill and whatever else, but in terms of your long-term health as well. STIs are nothing to laugh about, and they are at higher levels now than they have ever been since we started recording STI rates in the United States. So protect yourself, be safe. Um, there's no need to harm your health when it's something that anybody who wants to be with you will actually take the extra minute if they need to. Um, and if they don't, that's not somebody that you want to be with anyways, right? Okay. Um, it's not here on the page. Regular sleep patterns. I struggle with this one, not gonna lie. I'm a night owl. I like to sleep in late. It does not do me good. Your body is designed to go to sleep when it gets dark and get up when it gets light. That's how humans have been designed for many, many thousands of years. Um, and the better we do at sticking with those rhythms, the better our bodies feel. Um, our society isn't really set up for that, but it just is what it is. All right, that's all I'm going to say. We have reached the end. Thank you so much for being a part of my class. I know it's so weird just doing this online instead of being in person. Please feel that you can reach out to me via email. Um, and after our class is over, my door's always still open to you as well. I hope to meet some of you in person in future semesters and be your teacher again. All right. Thanks so much. Have a great holiday break. I had to think about what part of the year we're in right now. That's where I'm at. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you when we talk.